Hi everyone, I want to thank you all for taking the time to join us today for Enterprise Ireland's Women in Technology Leading the Way in Disruptive Innovation event in association with the Consulate General of Ireland, San Francisco. My name is Niamh O'Donnell and I'm a Trade Development Executive for Enterprise Ireland based here in the Bay Area. For those of you who do not know, Enterprise Ireland is the VC arm and international trade agency responsible for the growth of Irish enterprise globally. We were ranked as the #1 VC in Europe last year by Dealflow, and we're very committed to raising the bar for our female entrepreneurs. In recent years, we launched our action plan for women in business strategy and a number of specific supports tailored towards female entrepreneurs. Last year, of the 128 companies we invested in, 27 of those were female-led. This is an increase from approximately 7% of the companies we invested in 10 years ago to 21%. So there is still a little bit of a way to go. Today, I am delighted to welcome two trailblazing females, Suzanne Rice, who is a senior technology leader based here in the Bay Area, and Trish Scanlon, who is the founder and executive director of Soapbox Labs, one of our rockstar client companies. Suzanne and Trish, how are you doing today? Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
I want to just at this point let the audience know that if you have any questions for Suzanne or Trish throughout the Q&A, feel free to input your questions into the Q&A function and I'll get to them at some point during the fireside chat. Suzanne, I'm going to come to you first. Would you mind giving us a little bit of an insight into your own background and how you became a senior leader of technology here in the world's innovation capital?
Yeah, thanks for that, Niamh. I actually wonder myself that most days, to be honest with you. I'm from Cork, so let's make that important statement to begin with. But I started from an education perspective and did my undergrad in European studies. So there's really no correlation between where I started and where I've ended up. But did a master's then in business and also a postgrad in computer science, which I actually think was sort of the accelerator in terms of moving me into technology. Won my green card in the lottery. I'm one of those people, and came out to America and ended up in the Bay Area in a series of high-tech companies where I was just very fortunate to be able to work on things that I really enjoyed and to work with people that I really enjoyed working with, and to have strong mentors and advocates that helped and directed me throughout my career. So I would consider an unusual start to a tech career, but certainly very happy to be here now, and I'm having great fun at the moment.
Brilliant, brilliant. And Trish, I'm going to come to you with the same question. I'd love to learn more about your own background as a startup founder and how you built up Soapbox Labs to be the company it is today.
Yeah, sure. I mean, so I'm an engineer. My undergrad was in engineering, electronic engineering, actually, and back when computer science started in the arts department in DIT. So, but, you can judge how long ago that was. So I did my undergrad and ended up working in software engineering for a couple of years, decided to go back and do a PhD in speech recognition and AI. So that was back in 2000. So speech recognition was a very nascent technology, more aspirational, I think, at that point than practical. But we worked on a lot of the theory behind it and practical applications of it. There was a lot of speech recognition in the field, but less so until about 2009-10 when Siri was deployed via the Apple devices. So I worked across multinationals following my PhD. So that was in IBM research. That was in the States. So I was in Columbia University for a period of my PhD and ended up then following that into IBM research. And then into Bell Labs for 7 years. And that's very much Bell Labs. When I joined was Lucent Technologies, then Alcatel Lucent, and now they're Nokia Bell Labs. But when I was there, it was very much, in Ireland, they were setting up Bell Labs in Ireland. It was definitely it was a bridge between academia and industry. So, industrial research and looking for applications of Blue Sky's research in, we like to look at it from the lab to the living room. And then there's quite a big chasm between taking technology that's from academia and the lab, basically, and making it available into real products. So, after many years in Bell Labs and working on a lot of kind of innovation technologies, I think I eventually I had that entrepreneurial spirit. I was always advocating for new projects and, tangential things we should be working on. We should get into this. And I was always probably bugging all the management that we really needed to start these projects, and they'd have all these competitions, internal company competitions, with kind of moonshot projects and things like that I was always involved in. And to the point where eventually I decided I just needed to be the person to make those decisions myself. It is very interesting when you're working in multinationals, particularly in the innovation side. There's always, you're making the call, but there's always somebody maybe a couple of levels above you making the ultimate call on it. And, if you have that spirit in you, eventually I just needed to quit and do it myself and decide on my own path. And it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy to quit. I had, I saw the gap with basically watching my own daughter when she was 3 years old, interacting with technology, looking at what was out there with respect to speech recognition technology, and realizing my whole career I'd been working on adult speech recognition, and nobody in my industry or in any of the research groups never gave a thought to the fact that how different children were in terms of their physicality, in terms of their language, their behaviors, and what a huge impact that has on speech recognition. So, I saw the gap to found Soapbox Labs and embark on that journey. And that was back in 2013. So, it's been a wild ride for the last couple of years. But delighted where we've brought Soapbox today. We're 35 people in Dublin now. People out in the US and different parts around Europe, but predominantly in Dublin. I'm very proud to be in Dublin at the moment with growing the company from there.
Two fantastic stories and two fantastic backgrounds. And it's great to see that the working world has changed a lot over the last 30 to 40 years, with more females going into key leadership roles and, female entrepreneurship being on the rise. Suzanne, I'd love to direct this question at you, since you have a very unique background. From your perspective, how is this changing the landscape of organizations and the working world and the future of female founders and leaders?
Yeah, I think probably slowly is the answer that I would give to that, or maybe not as fast as it should be. It is changing, and there's a couple of different things that I think will accelerate that. There's a report that I was reading that quoted that for every one female that's in the C-suite, there's 3 females in a leadership position in that same company. And I think what that shows is if we can get women into these higher level positions, then, the rising tide will raise all boats. Like they will look to get more women into leadership roles as well. So that's one area that I think is extremely important. Also the board makeup of companies. There's some legislative changes here, in particular in California, in terms of the female representation on boards, but it's still only at about 20%. And it's actually only increased. The legislation sort of began to come into place. It's a slow roll, but it began to come into place in 2019. And since then, we've actually only increased female board representation by about just under 2%. So at that rate, in order to get to parity, that'll be 2045. So while I applaud the legislative changes, more needs to be done. We need more females in the boardroom and on boards. The other area is really ensuring that we create that pipeline. So how do we create the pipeline? Well, we do things like we get more girls in school exposed to STEAM and STEM. I'm not an advocate for just going down the science path. I do think that it needs to be balanced, but getting kids exposed to that at early stages is so important. And I'm not sure that we're doing enough of that. And it doesn't matter whether they go into technology or not. That's irrelevant really. But if we don't get them exposed, sort of especially girls at the 8 to 12-year-old stage, then we tend to lose them. But as the exposure starts, so if I take my own daughter, for example, she grew up here in Silicon Valley and is now in Galway, so shout out to NUIG, doing commerce and French. So even though she got exposed to technology and was very much, like she went to all-girls school, it was very much empowered female leadership background. She decided not to go into technology. That's okay, but she has that basis. So trying to get that basis in place and trying to drive that so that we can create that pipeline for future roles, I think is extremely important. And I don't believe that we're doing enough of it here in Silicon Valley. And from my understanding in Ireland, I think it's getting better, but I don't think that we're doing enough there. I heard about an interesting program that SFI are doing in Southwest Kerry for transition year students. That was actually really interesting. They're the types of innovative programs that we need to be putting in place. Now, I would argue the transition year is probably a little bit late, but still better late than never. So we've got to drive those programs. We've got to get that pipeline that ultimately will change it. And my hope is that it's not going to be 2045 before we can get to this parity, because that's just too long to wait.
Yeah, my daughter being in her 30s, I think at that point, that's kind of depressing.
Yeah. Sorry to depress you, Trish, but
no. But you know what?
It's reality.
You make a lot of good points. I'm actually involved in the immersive software engineering course to start. It's a new course in University of Limerick here. Mm-hmm. And the view there is, we're working really hard to try and encourage more girls to join at that, the graduate stage. I mean, ideally what we want to do is see some courses being a lot more balanced. A good example is when I actually started my electronic engineering course, I remember software engineering computer science was just starting. It was 50-50 in DIT at the time. Because it was such a new course, it actually started in the arts department. Kind of people didn't know where to put it to begin with, It was 50-50, and I was shocked to learn how it's down around 10%, 20% female take up. And you're right, because we're looking at the immersive software engineering course and trying to make sure we get more women encouraged into doing it. And what we're doing is basically getting people to have portfolios and not just, examiners. So, and the portfolio doesn't just need to be, I've been coding since I was 12, because, that's what we did in my school or a boys' school, or they're encouraged to do it. But creativeness and drive and entrepreneurship and all these other qualities can actually demonstrate, a mind towards problem solving. You will be as good at in addition in a software engineering course as somebody who's been coding since they're 12. Yeah. And that kind of thing too. And make people realize that software engineering is really creative, as well. It's a very creative process too. There's one form of software engineering or, technology where you're just reproducing stuff. And then there's the other thing where you're actually discovering and inventing and, and using that side of your brain. And I think we need to kind of excite people, really young kids, like you're saying, the 8 to 12-year-olds, that it's not the old staid view of a software engineering nerd sticking on their keyboard all day. There's lots of cool things to be done as well.
It's really interesting points. And I'm looking at a statistic here. According to the US Census Bureau, the number of female workers which are represented in STEM fields across the US currently stands at 27%, which is quite low, So I'm just kind of wondering, from your perspectives, what kind of impact would it have on, the landscape of the technology ecosystem if we encourage women to get into STEM earlier in their education? I know you've kind of touched on it briefly already, but have you got any kind of further insights on that?
From our perspective, to be honest, we all know we're facing into, a kind of almost crisis in the lack of engineering and tech talent. And, again, studies will show again and again, the more diverse the board, the exec level, the management, the more successful the company is. And we're also moving into a point where, technology is exploding. It's not going to be just brief touch points throughout our day. It's probably going to be integrated into more things that we care to admit in 5 to 10 years in the background throughout our day, knitted into our day. So if you're going to build a technology future, I want a diverse group of people coming up with the future that I'm going to have to interact with. Or as an old lady, ideally, e-health or, elder care in the home, that people will have thought about my needs, as opposed to, from one perspective. And I think all of us should be fighting for this. I think it's actually so important, not just we need more people in technology because we don't have enough and it's not practical really to, you've got 50% of the population you're not tapping into. Yeah. That's a need. And then we all should care about the fact of who's building our technology that we're going to have to live with every day. And to my mind, I really want to know that people who think like me or represent me or different ethnic groups or different, we all need to be represented in the groups that are building that future. And I think that's huge, that we, it's more of an urgency now at this point.
Yeah, I've read a study recently by Forbes, and it said that executive boards which have more diverse and cultural teams or culturally diverse teams have 33% more better than average profits than their counterparts. So I'd love to ask, I'll come to you on this one, Suzanne, what's your opinion on terms of having, you know, the value of having these women putting themselves forward for key leadership positions on these boards, and how can that, you know, improve the landscapes of organizations as well?
Yeah, so I think definitely to Tricia's point, like the more diversity into the Forbes report that you referenced, the more diversity, the better, and diversity can come in many different ways. I have one anecdote which I thought was interesting. I met with a woman probably 4 or 5 years ago, and she was a very senior executive here in the Valley and had taken sort of quasi early retirement. I mean, she wasn't that young, but at the same time, she wasn't ready to fully retire. And she decided that she wanted to get on a board. Now, this is a woman who had spent her entire career in the Valley and was at a very high level. So you would think, oh, she knows what to do. She knows what doors to knock on and so forth. And her point in the conversation was that she actually had no idea where to start. So she started with an Excel spreadsheet and wrote down all the names of the companies that she thought that she could, you know, be good for from a board perspective, and then looked at the skills that she had and tried to match them. And she then went and looked for a mentor, which was extremely difficult. She said she, again, assumed, like, I know lots of people, you know, this is going to be easy. And it wasn't. So she eventually narrowed it down to a group of people who were on multiple boards. And she decided this was the way, like, she could get to somebody that was on multiple boards, maybe they could tell her how to do it. And she ended up with a guy who I happen to have worked with in the past at Cisco. And she was very nervous to approach him. Now, he is one of the nicest guys that you could meet. She doesn't know that, but like, he's super laid back and would absolutely help anybody. So she reached out to him, and she said she, you know, was looking at her sort of, like, maybe she was about 60 at the time, her 60-year-old self going, why am I nervous approaching this guy about something that I'm well qualified for? So long story short, she met with him. He was as relaxed with her as he is with everybody else, and he helped her to get onto a board. But it always strikes me as somebody in that position with that amount of facilities and wherewithal at her fingertips, and yet she still struggled on how to move this forward. So how do we change that conversation? How do we change that paradigm earlier and get kids more confident across the board, boys and girls, but I would prefer to focus on girls. One of the areas that I'm involved with here is a group called GLAM, or the Girls Leadership Academy Meetup. Now, they actually scare me, to be honest with you, because they're 8 to 12-year-olds who have their own startups, and they do genuinely have their own startups, right? So you want to be nervous, that's where you need to go. But we bring them in, and you know, we help them with their coding, we help them with their business plans and so forth. So it's super interesting. But I guess I see my role in that as actually helping the kids to, you know, stand up straight, look people in the eye, shake hands, you know, all the sort of social skills that they may have missed out on. But it's really, really interesting to see the creativity at that stage. And how do we ensure that we harness that because it's not just these kids. Any kid that you find between 8 and 12 can be equally creative when given that opportunity and when given the space. So how do we give the space to people? How do we give the opportunities? How do we ensure that the educational system is in a place where it is not so focused on academics and what grade you got and how many points you got in the Leaving Cert, and more around, you know, are you producing well-rounded students who are confident in their own ability and know how to proceed and have a good understanding or basis of technology, but also realize that technology isn't just coding. It's so much more. It's, you know, a friend of mine has a gin distillery in West Kerry called Skellig. The production in Skellig is pure technology. I mean, that's like, if you don't have the technology behind that production process, then the gin doesn't get produced. So how do we open that up? How do we shift the paradigm? How do we broaden it out? And how do we get that younger generation to see it's not about, as Patricia's point, you're sitting in front of a computer coding all day long. It's so much more than that. And I think that we haven't quite tapped into that yet. And that is something that we need to do and we need to figure out.
Yeah.
No, that's really insightful, Suzanne. And in learning about the 8 to 10-year-olds and the GLAM Girls Leadership Academy, that's, you know, incredible that they have their startups at that age. You know, that's really inspirational for, you know, the future of, you know, female founders and entrepreneurship. And that kind of drives me to want to come on to that topic. Obviously, I've alluded to earlier in the introduction in terms of Enterprise Ireland. You know, we have an action plan for women in business strategy, and we're very committed to female entrepreneurship. And about 27 of the 128 companies we invested in last year were female-led, which is an increase from 7% 10 years ago to 21%. So Patricia, I would love to come to you on this one. You've built up your own company, you've been very, very successful. What did you find were the challenges and opportunities as a female founder? Obviously, you've gone through multiple investment rounds and funding rounds. I'd love to learn more about your own experience as a female founder and how you built up your company.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And, you know, it's something I get asked a lot and people are interested in. And it's a really hard one to answer because people aren't going to say to your face that they're not investing because you're female. People, you get a lot of no's and you got to be resilient. Guys, you know, men, women, everybody, it doesn't matter who you are, you will get no's, and that's okay, right? The problem is when you actually look at the numbers of women getting funded and the check sizes of women getting funded, and then you reflect back on your experience going, I have to face up to the fact that a number of those no's might have been their gut said not to invest, or, you know, rather than real sound reason. And maybe I didn't look like the typical, you know, founder they like to invest in, or I didn't act like, you know, the type A, you know, personality coming in, or maybe I didn't, you know, because I think we talk a lot. And one thing that does frustrate me, you know, when I think about how we can help female founders is that we talk about, we got to fix the women, you know, we got to fix them, we got to give them confidence, we got to, you know, and I totally agree, we got to get them confident to the point where you're sure yourself, right? You know, you can look at people in the eye, but we got to balance it with the fact that from the top down there isn't parity, there isn't equity, there isn't equal representation. And like you said, Suzanne, like, you know, at the, you know, even with the legislation in California, it got raised a couple of percent. Plus, there's a very capable woman there who's struggling to find a board place, you know. Yeah, I mean, all that together is quite like, you know, nobody's going to say it to your face, but you know what's happening. We all know what's happening. So I think we have to do it from both. I think we got to get the girls young. We've got to encourage them into tech in some experience. They don't have to be full software engineers, but that awareness, I think, is really important in any, even if you're on the business side. Business is going to touch all tech, and tech will touch all business into the future. So therefore, you got to look at, right, so what can we fix? Where is the problem? And if you were to look, one of the things I'm fascinated with is the investment committees, right? Investment committees everywhere, right? So, you know, in Enterprise Ireland, we know that, you know, Enterprise Ireland are government run, and we see a lot of balance there. When you go outside of that, you're looking at you know, investment VCs, your investment houses, you know, whether it's angel syndicates, capital, whatever, who at the end of the day are making decisions? If it's not an angel writing their own check, who's making the decision, and on behalf of who are they doing this? There isn't representation. Often, you know, I hate to say it, sometimes there's women in those businesses, but they don't have a seat at the investment committee. And that's important, you know, and people sometimes report their numbers. And then let's be honest, a lot of, you know, VCs and partners don't all have investment backgrounds. You don't need somebody to come from VC to get a job in VC. That doesn't happen. It doesn't happen for men. It doesn't happen for women. So, you know, what I'd like to see is a number of changes made. And I'd like us all to recognize who are the LPs in the venture capital firms. You know, in Ireland, you know, it's Enterprise Ireland, it's some pension funds, it's, you know, some public, you know, related money going in there. And as a result, you know, we all have a responsibility, you know, to make sure women get funded. Yes, there may be a smaller pipeline. We often hear that the pipeline's not there, but, you know, anecdotally, I think we all know women who are struggling to get funded. I also know some amazing businesses who have struggled to get funding. So Enterprise Ireland have done a fantastic job. I think one of the top VCs in Europe for investing in women, but Enterprise Ireland do it at the you know, initial stage, I think CSF it's called. But then when it comes to HBSU, you need to have matched funding from private investment. So either it's a VC or an angel syndicate, or, you know, family and friends if you're lucky enough to have that network. And then Enterprise Ireland can come in. So Enterprise Ireland want to help, but they're going to be hampered if the rest of the investment community is not diverse when it comes to their investment committees. So I think, that's a very long-winded way of saying it, but who are the limited partners investing in the firms? And if that's public money, let's see some accountability around that. And I'd like to see it, because I think for one, Ireland Inc. is missing a massive opportunity. If you have a bit of groupthink going on, or, you're selling into, baby equipment, or you're selling a breast pump, or you're selling, all these amazing technologies that are out there for women, or, femtech as they call it, and all these things. If you get a bunch of people sitting around going, I don't know if that's really a business, are you really representing the best interests of the female founders who are coming in? Are you really representing the best interests of Ireland when there's public money going into it? And that's what I'd really like to see. Also see a little more transparency, and it's just transparency. How many people came through the door, how many founders got turned away, how many people got to pitch, how many went to investment committee, and who's on the investment committee, and who are the LPs, and all that. It sounds like a lot, but it's not. It's just a bit of transparency. And also, when you hire your next GP, did you have equal number of candidates? Did you approach enough people, female candidates? We know there are more than enough willing and able, and the ability, and the people like yourself, Suzanne, all across Ireland, and myself. There are people in technology companies, there are people in startups, there are people in investment, there are people who are well capable of being the next GP in a VC in Ireland, and I really would like to see more of that, rather than in conjunction with helping women to get that funding at that early stage. You've got to do it in both ways, or we're not going to make, and we haven't made any progress, let's be honest. It's been pretty miserable over the last few years. I think we actually decreased this year, so
Yeah, no, that's really interesting points, Trish. And I read a stat recently that only 15% of general partners of VCs in the US are female, which, that's once again very, very low. And there's a lot that should be done to try and encourage women to put themselves forward for them positions. But obviously there should be opportunities and, initiatives put in place from the higher level as well to encourage women to feel that they can put themselves forward as well. Suzanne, I'd love to come to you on this as well and get your opinion. Obviously, you're based in the Bay Area and you've a lot of experience in the VC ecosystem as well. Have you got any opinions on how that can be improved within the US or in turn Ireland, obviously, because you're Irish as well?
Yeah, so without wishing to depress everybody, I think, Trish, what you're saying in terms of what the situation is in Ireland, I don't think it's hugely different if you look in Sandhill Road, which is the sort of the hub of VCs here in the Valley. It still is very male dominated. So we probably have two choices here. We can say it's very male dominated, that's terrible, we're not going to do anything about it. Or we can begin to figure out how can we affect change and how can we make differences. One of the things that I don't think that we do enough of is really reaching out to the network that we have of female business entrepreneurs across many different sectors. So are we developing that network? Are we tapping into that network? And I'm not sure that we are, to be honest with you. I don't think it's happening as much as we can. So how do we do that? How do we raise the profiles of people? How do we make those connections? And there's the Irish Technology Leadership Group here is a pretty significant and pretty strong group of technology leaders, both within the Valley, but also across the US. So what are Enterprise Ireland or the Consulate or the IDA doing to tap into ITLG, into that audience? And I know it's happening, but maybe it needs to happen a little bit more. There's the Irish Network in the Bay Area, which another group of people that, if you look at the average profile, they probably are in technology. So, more than the woman a couple of years ago who couldn't figure out how to get onto a board and then sort of methodically went through the process. How are we methodically going through that process? How are we thinking about what connections do we have? What sort of cousins of cousins do we have that can help us to maybe open a door or maybe have that conversation or direct people in the right way? And that's very much, it's a grassroots type of effort, but I do think that grassroots effort has to happen in order for change to happen. It's not like there's nothing going to happen magically overnight where somebody comes with a magic wand and then suddenly there's all these women who are in leadership positions in VC worlds and are thinking about this in the right way. The grassroots effort has to get us there. So how are we doing that? How are we setting up that community? How are we setting up that structure in order for that to happen organically? I don't think that we're spending enough time or focus on that. And it's something that I think we really need to change.
Yeah, I think that despite whether you're a woman in business, leadership, technology, entrepreneurship, you can't really pay a price for sound mentorship.
Mm-hmm.
And Trish, I'd love to come to you on this one. Have you had any, mentors that were pivotal in your career, or did mentorship help you when you were, starting Soapbox Labs? How did that, obviously being a female entrepreneur, is there a value in having female entrepreneurs you can look to for inspiration?
I probably had not one, I probably had many people, and I'm always been that way about everything. I seek advice. I love to talk to people. I reach out to people. There's many people I would have talked to quite often, in different walks of life, in different businesses. So I kind of went at it as more the crowdsourcing, but people I went back to frequently. And they're people I would have met throughout my career back in, academia, or, when I went to the multinationals, even in government, anybody like that I knew. And I would just have so many coffees. And I still do that to date. And I think even like you're saying, the Irish network out in the States, it's just, even remarking the other day that I reached out to somebody that somebody had made an introduction to 5 years ago, and, kind of the odd tic-tac over the years, but so valuable. And people are very generous, I think, with their time, and especially when they've been there before. Yeah. So you do find, some people are just busy, and you gotta, respect that as well. But I do think that pay it forward thing really does work. And I think, women in particular that I've ever contacted have been very generous, with their time and their contacts. And equally, I try to be as much as I can as well. And I do think, in the US, I've definitely tapped into the Irish community. I've gone, my LinkedIn list is long and strong, and the contacts are fantastic, throughout my career. And I do lean on it when I need to, and then try and pay it forward myself. So yeah, sourcing advice from the crowd, I think, is actually really good. That, when people are starting out in entrepreneurship, not to be too cagey about your idea. Just, go out there and soundboard it with as many people as you can that you respect. And some people you find yourself naturally going back to over the years, and some people, they'll have a bit of advice and you move on again,
I'd love to
just
talk.
add one thing to that, Niamh. I think sometimes we forget, we sort of look at people or look at their profiles or whatever and think, oh, I could never speak to them because they're just so sophisticated and, so senior. Everybody is human at the end of the day. And that's something that I think I find myself forgetting as well. So if we can remember that human factor, the chances are that people will respond. And they, maybe somebody is busy at the moment and they just don't have the time or whatever, but there's one female that I've ever met in my career who I would genuinely say wasn't interested in helping. I would put her as the exception. I'll put her in an exception box. Every other female that I've met, and honestly males as well, they'll help. I mean, people will have the conversation with you, so find that connection, find whatever that is to start the conversation. And once the conversation is started, then great things happen. So start the conversation.
Yeah, Trish, you mentioned briefly there how you tapped into the Irish network in the US, and obviously you've both had success in the US. Suzanne, you grew up in Ireland and you've built a fantastic career here in, the world's tech capital. Trish, obviously you're born in Ireland as well, and you've built up a company which has expanded into the US. I'd love to hear from both of you. What is the nuance in doing business or working in Ireland versus the US? Obviously, Suzanne, you can come at it from your own perspective and as building up your career within the US. And then obviously, Trish, you've built a business which is, scaling in the US as well. I'd love to understand what is the nuances in doing business in each market. Suzanne, if you want to start off with that one, and
sure.
then we can come to Trish.
Yeah. So I think if I reflect back on my career, and particularly in the US, I did work for a couple of years in Ireland before I left, but that definitely wasn't in tech, because as I say, I was more in academia than tech in my early stages. But I would say I don't know if it's a nuance. I've been incredibly lucky all along, but I've also taken chances. So you know, when I came to America first, my first job was waitressing in the Olive Garden. Now I had my master's, but you know, I needed to make money, so I went and waitressed in the Olive Garden, and I got a great experience there. Like and you might say, hang on, you're waitressing in the Olive Garden. I actually learned a lot about supply chain from a food perspective. I'd worked in pubs in Ireland, so I actually had a particular interest in supply chain, although I didn't know it at the time because I didn't recognize it as such. But once I got to the Olive Garden, I was like, oh, this is the same thing as, you know, figuring out what kegs you need when and in what quantity. It's the exact same thing with the salad or the breadsticks. For those of you that are based in America, you know, they're limitless in the Olive Garden. So what is the supply chain that pushes into that? I would say that I've taken chances. I probably took a chance, you know, coming to America sight unseen and not having a job and not having anything set up. But I've also had a lot of luck along the way. I've had a lot of breaks that maybe, you know, other people wouldn't have got. Now, I mean, I would say that I worked pretty hard for those as well, but other people work hard and don't maybe have as much breaks. So I think there is a sense here in the States that, you know, if you work hard, it does pay off. Now, I don't think it's actually any different in Ireland, to be honest with you. Like, just to be clear, I do think that it's the same. But if I think then about the main sort of threads throughout the career, one would be taking chances. So like I took a chance when I came and worked in the Olive Garden. I took a chance when we moved to Silicon Valley. I ended up in I worked at Cisco for many, many years. And I was very fortunate because Cisco's philosophy was nobody ever asked, do you actually know what you're doing? There was just more a sense of, oh, you're interested in working on something, then go work on it. So, you know, I got to go from IT into finance. I had absolutely no idea what was going on in finance, but, you know, figured it out. I ended up in a sales ops role where I absolutely did not know what was going on. I mean, it was one of the most pivotal moments in my career because the person that I was going to go work for convinced me to go work there and convinced me that I didn't need to know anything at all about sales ops. I didn't need to worry about it at all. So I went in confidently thinking, oh, she's going to look after me. And then she announced the following day that she was leaving the company. So I was now left not knowing anything about sales ops. And there's one thing about fake it till you make it, but when you're coming into quarter end in sales ops, there's no faking. But so at that point, I decided I would take a leave of absence. That seemed like the logical thing for me to do because, you know, as far as I was concerned, there was nothing else because I'd, you know, faked my way into this job. And one of the leaders in the company, a male, came to me and said, like, what is wrong with you? Like, do you know what a booking is? Do you know what an invoice is? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, you're fine, figure it out. And it's that sort of implicit confidence in your ability to figure things out. So take the chance, you know, go there and take the opportunity, and then get yourself in situations where people have confidence in you. Now, I was never going to design chips, just to be careful, to be sure. Like, I mean, I wasn't that crazy, but at the same time, within the space that you're in, there's a lot of different things that you can do. I went from there into product in the data center side and did a product launch for a blade server that, I mean, I'm still like who gave me that job and why did they give it to me? But yet it was great fun, you know. So don't be afraid to try something completely different. I work in privacy at the moment. I mean, you know, not that I don't know anything about privacy. I guess I know an amount, but at the same time, like I didn't grow up in privacy. Like I grew up in very different roles, but I'll take the chance. I'll have the ability to learn. And I also have the support of the organizations around me and the people around me to say, okay, just go ahead and figure it out. And, you know, the confidence that I will be able to do it. I don't think I'm unique. I think that everybody else can have that opportunity as well. Like there's nothing special about my skill set. There's nothing special about the way that I work. The only difference that I can point to is I'm willing to take a chance on something. So I would encourage everybody to go out, take that chance. And it doesn't matter whether it's in the workplace. It doesn't matter whether it's in, you know, whether it's a social thing, whether it's sports. Go out and try. What's the worst thing that can happen?
Yeah, I actually think somebody said, you know, sometimes the most rewarding things you can do are the things where you may publicly fail at. Yeah. But feel the fear and do it anyway kind of attitude is very interesting. That, you know, sometimes there's not many people who are going to go out and take the chance where you can publicly fail. And those of us who do, there's great rewards in that, you know.
Yeah, and it's okay. I was thinking about this over the weekend. I went to the US women's soccer team, and one of my nieces was with me, who's over on an exchange program at UCSB from Dublin, and you know, the obviously the US soccer team or women's soccer team are pretty good. They had a very significant win this week in the courts in terms of equal pay, which is phenomenal to see. A lot of work behind the scenes, but they got there. But one of the people on the team is the daughter of a friend of mine who's actually an Irish woman. So Tierna plays on the US soccer team, and my niece is with me who plays on the the Irish hockey team. And you know, I would say they're both equal from an athletic perspective. Like, they've both achieved everything that they can achieve in their sports. But yet, I would say the confidence level for the woman who's on the US soccer team versus my niece was quite interesting to see the difference. And, you know, so I'm saying to my niece, you're as good, like, you're probably actually better. You're in a very niche sport, like, you're a phenomenal athlete. So have that confidence in yourself to know that you are that good. And we all do it. Like, we look at somebody else and we go, oh, they're so much better than me. And they're, you know, they're smarter, they're more athletic, they're whatever that is. Not necessarily. So it's trying to get across that chasm of worrying about these things that we shouldn't spend any energy worrying on. I think is something that we all need to work on and we all need to focus on.
That's very inspirational. And I'm going to take the opportunity now to go into the Q&A and see what questions are coming in from the audience. So I have one here. So do you agree that the expectation founders have access to early pre-seed from family, friends is a barrier to women who tend to have less disposable income or earn less? Also, the need to pay first and get your grant later is a barrier to many. I'm going to come to you on that one, Trish, considering you're a female founder. Would you agree or disagree on that?
100%. I almost laugh when people say, you used to talk about family and friends. I'm like going, my family and friends don't have that kind of money. I mean, yes, if you can shake down your family and friends for 100 grand, well done you, you know, and then there's the rest of us, like, you know, so that is ridiculous. And I actually does frustrate me a lot. And if you want to encourage equity and diversity, if you take somebody from a socially disadvantaged background and you throw that at them, you know, somebody else who can access 100 grand or 50 grand or 20 grand, doesn't matter how much, gets that leg up. That's not equity. Like, we're never going to address equity in that way. And equally, you know, often, yeah, maybe you come from a certain background, you have maybe your college buddies, maybe whatever. I mean, that, and I agree, the grant paying 50-50, or, you know, there are some of those very early supports from you know, before you would approach Enterprise Ireland, where you do 50-50, and most people don't realize the 50% can actually come from your own sweat, basically, your own time in there, and people should realize that. But when it comes to the later funding, and a lot of investors want to see, you know, your POC, they want to see traction and they want to see it built. But did you not get friends and family money? Did you not? Well, some people are paying mortgages, some people are paying down debt, some people are, you know. No, I 100% agree. And I really empathize with anybody who gets that thrown at them, that why haven't you built more? And you go, well, you know, I kind of need the funding to pay my rent before I can go build, you know, I mean, and you're disadvantaging people from the outset there. Again, you know, Suzanne, we're talking about, you know, we need to be able to address these things. You know, that's an issue. That's a huge issue. And you're just giving, you know, the more opportunities to people who are privileged to have access to that early funding. And that is a massive problem. Like, and I'd love to see us talking more about equity in more ways than one. Like, you know, that, you know, if you have access to that kind of thing, you have that first leg on the ladder, you're up that first rung, and we can't, you know, that's not opportunity. That's not where the innovation comes from, just people who have opportunity. It doesn't. It comes from everywhere and anywhere. You know, again, Ireland Inc. will do better if we find those nuggets of brilliance and innovation in the population, and regardless of background, we will do better as a nation if we recognize that, rather than keep handing the same thing to the people who've had it all along.
And you've mentioned briefly earlier as well, Trish, about kind of legislation that could potentially be put in. Do you have any advice, I suppose, for the VC ecosystem or for Enterprise Ireland in terms of how we can empower female entrepreneurs going forward?
Stop just treating it as lip service, to be honest, a real plan. When the Me Too era kind of kicked in, and I know a lot of people, there was a lot of good, bad, and difference that came out of that, but a lot of people had to speak publicly and talked about changes they were going to make. Well, you know what? Great. Tell us what changes you made and what happened and what was the outcome. What happens often is legislation comes in when, people don't voluntarily change their ways. We would like, the free open market system to actually just correct itself. But it doesn't happen. And unfortunately, you have confirmation bias. You almost have, well, I don't know that many women who are successful in startups. Therefore, my guts tell me not to. Well, that's because you're never going to fix that problem of you can't, if you can't, what's it? You can't see it. If you can see it, you can be it kind of thing. That idea that the more people, and it's not just about the women who are going to give themselves, jump into entrepreneurship, but we really kind of have to be mindful of the people making the decisions and writing the checks. If they haven't seen enough women, they're going to have this subconscious thing saying it's a risk, it's more of a risk. And there's a huge amount of research that's been done around the questions that female founders get asked during due diligence or even the initial stages that tend to be all about, mitigating for risk, where, and this is done in the US, I think, where the men were asked about growth. How are you going to handle the rapid scaling, and women, how are you going to mitigate against your business failing? And if you do that, you can totally, and, Europe is remarkably conservative compared to the US as well. We have to take all that into account. So, we can ask, we can invite people to change and show us, but when they don't, and when you've given them how many years to change, at some point, yes, we kind of, you need to come in a little more forcefully. And I hope people out there are listening, and I hope people are, not just giving it lip service anymore, because it's, when you give people that many years to change and they don't, something else has to come about.
I'm conscious of time now, so I'm going to come to our final couple of questions. And Suzanne, I'm going to direct this one from you. I'd love to know from your perspective, have you any insight on terms of how an organization should take the leap in having more of an inclusive approach to their boards in terms of entrepreneurship, leadership, and technology in general? Have you got any final bits of insight or advice for organizations trying to take that leap for a more inclusive approach?
Yeah, I mean, it begins with the first step, and that's easy to say, but it's probably the truth. I think that organizations need to have a paradigm shift in the way in which they approach this diversity in general. And obviously, we're focused on women today, but more diversity. One of the companies that I've worked at, there's actual metrics around the pipeline of people that you're interviewing for various roles, and you're measured against that metric. And you don't get away with it. And there's not lip service to, oh, I have to have a diverse panel, so I'm going to pull X, Y, or Z person in. That makes a difference. That suddenly makes a difference to the makeup of the people that are on your team. There's not all companies are doing it, but let's do more of that. Let's have that mindset as we're from overall organizations or institutions. Let's think about how we broaden out that diversity. Within organizations itself, there's a lot of different groups around women in tech. There's lots of different groups. We, in the current company that I'm in, we do coffee mornings. Now, it sounds silly, but you get people to know each other in a very informal type of situation. Begin to expand that out. Suddenly you find then 3 months, 6 months down the road, you have people who are coming back to you saying, I met you at that coffee morning and I heard you say X, Y, or Z. So what's that sort of, if we take genericized coffee mornings, what are the coffee mornings that are you doing? What's that soft network that you're building within your community, whatever your community is on a day-to-day basis? The legislation will help with this, but it's not going to change it overnight. We have to each day think about, okay, what did I do today to build that network? not just for myself, but for other people around me. How do I help other people? How do I help earlier in career? How do I help the 8 to 12-year-olds? How do I help the kids in, there's a school here, Christopher Ray, which is tends to be first generation lower income kids. What are we doing to help them to continue with funding so that they can get to university? There's not one thing. There's not, my earlier point, there's not like a magic wand that we can come in and wave, but there are small things. There's micro changes that we can all make on a day-to-day basis. Some of us has the opportunity to do it in a broader scale, but everybody has the opportunity to do something on a daily basis. And until such time as we have that mindset, until such time as we wake up each morning and say, okay, what am I going to do? What's going to change? What introduction am I going to make? What information am I going to do? What door am I going to open? That's when we begin to see real change and sustainable change. And I don't know that we've got there yet. And I hope in my lifetime that we will get there.
Well, that's very interesting, Suzanne. And similarly to that question, I'd love to understand from both your perspectives, have you got any advice for a female entrepreneur or a female in general trying to take that leap into leadership, entrepreneurship, technology? Have you got any final bits of advice in terms of how they should take that leap? I'll come to you, Trish, on this one first, and then we can go to Suzanne.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's, I think it goes back to the point from earlier, I think fear is a big one, I mean, fear of getting out of your comfort zone, being prepared to fail. I mean, I would often say to people, imagine what's the worst thing that could happen. Just really sit with it. Sit with what's the worst thing that if you go ask for the promotion, or if you go ask for your pay raise, or you go to quit your job to set a start, what's the worst that could happen? And often it's just the fear of failure, public failure, embarrassment. And you go, I sit with that. How bad would it be? Yeah, it would probably really sting for a while. And, but then what about the advantage if it actually worked? Really sit with that. Imagine if so that bit of shame and that bit of knockback or whatever, versus the satisfaction of it worked and what it could do for your career, and it could, leading the way and breaking through those things. So I would just say, yes, it's scary sometimes. And, it took me, I remember sitting on the idea of leaving, my job for a while and kicking around, talking to lots of people, and then actually doing it, it was terrifying. I'm not saying it wasn't but, and then each stage of taking investment, I'm taking somebody else's money. Oh my God. And what if I fail? And then it's like, what? Tons of people do it all the time. And you will do your very best if you're that type of person, and that's all you can do. And just so, again, feel the fear and do it anyway.
Suzanne, I'd love to come to you on the same question. Have you got any final bits of advice for a female trying to take that leap into leadership or technology?
Yeah, so I think basically it's a repeat of what Trish said. Fear is our biggest enemy, and it's the chances are it's not going to be the end of the world. It might be uncomfortable, it might be awkward, it might be, any of the above, but the world is not going to stop revolving. So take that leap, take that chance, move it forward, but do it in a way that you're bringing other people with you. Like, don't just do it for your own self-promotion is the advice that I generally give people. The other most important thing is make sure you're having fun doing it. I think if you're happy doing something, if you're having fun doing something, the landscape changes around you. So at the point in which you're not having fun, stop doing it. It's okay. Like it's again, like we all have to put bread on the table. I get that, but the chances are that there are other ways for you to do it. So let's think about those other ways.
Fantastic. Suzanne, Trish, thank you very much for joining me this morning, or in your case, Trish, this afternoon, for joining us from the west of Ireland. Your insights have been really, really interesting, and I can see the chat function. There's a lot of fantastic comments, so thank you both for joining. For the audience who are still here, this has been recorded, so it will be available to rewatch on the Consulate General of Ireland San Francisco YouTube page if you want to rewatch the video afterwards. Thank you all for joining this morning or afternoon, depending on where you're calling from.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye.